Animation, cartoons, anime has always been a media that could potentially challenge things, right? Challenge the way we see things and how things are done, or certain ideals that certain people have, and other things of the sort, right? It's a free realm of doing whatever the hell you want. That's the point of freedom of expression. Doing whatever the hell you want because you can, Not like it's going to affect anything in the real world or anything like that. But so many people be so damn uppity nowadays that you just can't challenge anything. Recently, we had Mushoku Tensei had Rudeus go ahead and buy a damn slave girl, and essentially, when it comes down to things, kind of didn't necessarily do what anybody expect them to do, like freedom, or just do all the other basic things that a normal person would do if they were in that position, right? But here's the thing, though. Rudeus ain't that decent of a dude. I don't know if you haven't really noticed that. Granted, I don't even watch Mushoku Tensei, and I can tell you that, that's pretty much the case, right? Not all heroes are, wearing their capes. Or better yet, not all protagonists wears a damn cape, honestly. Not saying that, he ain't a good person or there ain't anything good in him. There is. But at the end of the day, if you can't change anything, or you don't have the power to change things about it, then what's the point? You might as well just do everything what everybody else is doing, essentially, right? And don't get me wrong, that logic is very flawed too, because obviously if you do everything what everybody else is doing, nothing will progress. Everything is just going to be, the same, and nothing ever will be challenged and changed. And that's perfectly 100% understandable, and that's something that, you should kind of consider. But at the same time, when it comes to a fiction, when you're telling a story, especially when you're using things like this, it's kind of should be more out there and more necessary to use, not just for shock value, but for using it for like actually voicing a opinion about certain things, or maybe, putting this out there as like a truth that does still happen. Slavery does still exist. Like, South Africa might need a minute to think about that, or just the entirety of Africa in general, right? So when it comes down to things, I just kind of want to bring this type of topic back up, essentially talk about how, stories will use very uncomfortable plot points, or bring up plot points that honestly should be brought up, but don't really ever get brought up in a way that it matters a lot of the damn time, or do things for the story in some ways and stuff like that, right? So, as we said before, again, Rudy is about a slave and doesn't necessarily freedom, but you still have him around and stuff like that, right? And obviously, a lot of people would just go ahead and free him, but that's not the case, obviously. And that's perfectly fine to have that in this fiction, because one, many anime have done this, right? And not just in serious ways, but in corny, hilarious ways, and lewd sort of senses as well. Like, The Mystery of the Labyrinth of Another World is one of those damn shows where it has slave girls, like Roxanne, that one dwarf chick. And they were also, put in that damn position. And, that was fine, because it was what it was. The show has it, and that's the world that kind of exists with it. And there's not really much to be, I guess, like, thinking indifferent about. Slaves kind of just exist in that world. You can buy them. You can do them. It is what it is. I wouldn't be surprised if Inner Species Reviewer will also have something like that in their world too. They might do, honestly. So it's not necessarily like something that's like, oh, it's horrible and stuff like that. Sometimes it's just part of their society. Sometimes certain things just kind of happens because that's what the world kind of is in their world. There isn't just a good fairy tale story where everybody just gets along and everything like that. No, bad shit happens, and it does kind of happen in our world too. But in fiction, it at least tells you that this happens and shows you that this happens to remind you, yeah, it's bad, it sucks, and you might need to just, keep that in mind, right? Whether you do something about it or you fight against it, it's completely up to you, but it's just a thing that kind of exists there, right? Same way with anytime you see people talk about how they got McDonald's rapade before, and that's kind of like a thing that be used in animation as well. Hell, Genshin recently kind of almost implied it with Lynette, with her backstory, her past as a kid growing up, and she almost had that moment to happen to her if it wasn't for Kino coming through to save her ass at the end of the day. Nowadays, we usually get stories and animations and cartoons that doesn't necessarily challenge these type of things, mainly because they're too scared to do it because of modern sensibilities and people like that. Like Hell of a Boss, when anytime Bliss usually say something along the lines that is just absolutely ridiculous, it does be on some offensive nature, but again, that's kind of his character. He's a damn imp from hell. Of course he's supposed to be, mean and, hella offensive and things like that, right? He should be able to say things like retardation and, call people the F word that refers to gay people and stuff like that. The only reason why he can't is because our world is too damn sensitive to allow fiction to just be fiction, honestly, right? Because why does he get a magical, mystical bleeping sound anytime he uses the F word? It doesn't make any kind of sense. Or especially it's like the Boondocks from season 4 at the end of all things, when Rilo Goodluck come through and say like, oh, did you know you can say the N word all day? You can say that, it's fine. But if you say the other F word that refers to gay people, then we have a problem. And he proceeds to do the exact same thing he says he's gonna do. It just says the N word constantly, he said the F word constantly, just flip between these two. And it just shows you, yeah, this is a bit weird and it's hella unfair, right? So yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Right? At the end of the day, I want people to understand that this is just the thing that kind of happens. Not everybody is going to be down and for, people of different genders and things like that, right? It is what it is. Like, if you don't like it, that's fine. But there's going to be tons of people that's still against you because they just have their ideas and beliefs of what they think is right and what's wrong. And I know a lot of times people do this for shock value, but honestly, it's not sometimes just meant to be for shock value. Sometimes it's meant to push a story along and things of the sort, or just to remind you that this is a thing and this is bad. Honestly, it sucks. Just keep it in check, honestly. Hell, I can honestly even use my own story that I've been writing, for example. Like, for instance, Jay is not necessarily the best of people either. He did McDonald's pay like 3 people in his story, right? And he's the main character. Even though 2 times was Despair kind of using him in that sort of way, but 1 time he did it just on his own. 1 time was because of Tenko and how she was just being hella annoying, but Despair kind of lead him into that, and that was kind of more on Despair's side of doing that. And then another time was Toko, which Despair again took over his mind, and that was also like a thing that kind of happened, and that's why you don't really see Genocide Jack like that. But then there was 1 time when Kaede died after her class trial, and he took it out on Mukuro and ended up using her fully as himself, not in Despair, but fully as himself, and just forcibly took Mukuro's cheeks, right? Don't get me wrong, she did just like, oh, if you want to take it out on me, then it's fine, it's whatever. But still, he basically took her goodies. It is what it is, right? And granted, he really hasn't done anything like that since, but still, nonetheless, it's just like, yeah, don't get me wrong, like, he's trying to do his best, but he's not above from doing something completely evil. And he's the hero protagonist type of character, even though he's not really much of a hero, honestly. Hell, and this might be a controversial one, but it's fiction, so I don't really care. But hell, in that world, you're not even supposed to be having a gay relationship. I'm just gonna be honest with you, because the main focus of the world is supposed to be on him. He's the only male in that world. Everybody else is female. The only person in that world that's supposed to matter when it comes to, smashing and having a relationship with and things like that. But then, it has to be dealt with in some shape or form. If you find out or something like that happens, then there will be a punishment that will be issued. It is what it is. That's just kind of the world that he set up and made, honestly. And that's kind of just what it is of that, right? So, again, not everything has to be all in the books of being, sensible for everybody. Sometimes you just don't have stories like that. It's why personally I'm so damn against people wanting to censor everything or try to get rid of lollies in anime or whatever else is existing, because, at the end of the day, people should be allowed to make what they want to make, obviously. Like, obviously don't take it to the real world. That shouldn't have to even be said. But at the end of all things, if it's fictional and that's just how the world is set up, that's just how the world is set up. There is no really big thing that needs to really change for that. The whole point of this entire discussion is just the fact that not everybody's a good person. Hell, at some points in times, I would even think that you have seen enough content creators to get in trouble to be, having that idea in your head that not everybody is solid, honestly. Right? So, at the end of all things, yes, while there is people that will try to do their best, and even though some of those bad people will also try their best to do what good they can, no one's perfect at the end of the day. There's just some truth that's just going to be out there that will forever exist as long as humans continue to exist. And it kind of is what it is at this point, right? So, at the end of all things, these are the things that happen in fiction that honestly just kind of reminds us that we need to be better, honestly, in a way, and just keep an eye out for things like this, right? And that's why I'm so like heavy for pushing towards things that is of this sort of nature, to push boundaries and things of that in fiction, because this type of stuff honestly needs to be done more often, and not just for shock value but for actual like story reasons, and just kind of remind people that yeah, this shit exists and there's not really much we can do about it, right? What's the point of complaining about something if you don't have the power or money to change it? It just is what it is. So that's essentially what but also at the same time, it's not that you should give up or something like that, but it's just to remind you that it does exist and it will happen. But that's essentially what I have for you for this one. So hopefully you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification on our way out. Also follow me on the socials, and if you'd like to donate to the channel, Patreon is available as well. And until then, this is your boy Jay, signing off. Have a blessed day.